Hi there, everyone. My name is Shelby Forsythia, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the podcast host of Coming Back Conversations on Life After Loss, and the author of Permission to Grieve, as well as another book called Your Grief, Your Way, that's hitting shelves in September 2020. Today I want to talk about the intersection of grief and being queer. My mom died when I was 21, and the biggest pain point for me in my relationship with her and in my grieving of her is the fact that she did not accept my sexuality as a queer person before she died. And so there was this pain of not being seen or heard or fully acknowledged before she left the earth. And to this day, it's one of the things that continues to circle around in my brain, and I'm continuing to mull over and process as I process the additional grief, or kind of the baseline grief, of just losing her. And I think that there's three distinct griefs that come with being queer. There's individual grief, there's communal grief, and then there's ancestral grief. And they kind of start in the middle and radiate outward. There's individual grief, which is the kind of the grief of being different, the grief of having to keep secrets, the grief of having to stay hidden or closed off from family and friends because of the person that you are. And then there's also, too, the grief of missing out on activities like prom or sports or hobbies that you really think you'd love because of your identity and fear of that being exposed in the world. In the larger kind of communal grief, there's the grief of being one small piece of a community that continues to be hated and marginalized and oppressed and even killed in certain parts of the world, and coming out, while often touted as this joyful celebration and embracing who you are and all these other things, is also a kind of doorway that you step through, where after you've stepped through it, you have joined this larger queer community for the rest of your life. And so you permanently step into this reality that may not have been true for you before in joining a queer community. And there is grief in that. There is a recognition that, yes, I am not alone. There are others of us out here. And also there is a communal struggle and a communal hardship that we are all continuing to face. And then the last kind of umbrella of queer grief, at least from my perspective, is ancestral grief, the grief of those who have gone before. And for all queer people, there's this weight of knowing that it has not always been okay to be queer. We have been killed for this. We have been ostracized for this. We have been shut out because of this. And especially for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, there are traditions that glorified and valued queerness in cultures that were squashed out by white supremacy, by colonization, and by settlement as well. And so there's grief in those things being lost or trampled or kind of choked out by an authoritative and oppressive power. And so there's these ancestral griefs in being queer that we're grieving as well. And so you can look at grief and being queer in kind of two ways. You can go inside out, or you can go outside in. But kind of no matter where you look and start to peel away these layers, there's the grief of being yourself as a queer person, being part of a community of grief, and being part of an ancestral lineage of people who have been queer since the beginning of time. This is not a new thing, and if you're queer, you definitely know that to be true. And what's interesting about this intersection of grief and queerness is that it's a lot to carry. So grief is already a hard thing to carry, but being queer on top of it is like, oh crap, I gotta deal with not only the loss of my mother, but the grief of being queer on top of that. And there are places where that intersects, and there are places where it doesn't, but I carry those two griefs all the same. And as I'm grieving my mom and her lack of acceptance and the understanding and the religious conflicts and all the ways that we butted heads before she died, I also have this awareness that I'm part of a larger community and a lineage that has been ostracized, and grieving these torn and severed connections as well. And so you can kind of see where they overlap each other. So in leading into the exercise for this video, when I'm feeling downtrodden or overwhelmed or really, really lonely in this space that is the grief of being queer, something that I turn to is a thing that grounds me and reminds me that I'm not alone. It's like, let's put your feet on the floor and surround you with something that feels like community or feels like home. And the number one way that I do that is through ritual. These physical and tangible reminders and these practices that I do with my body and my mind and my heart and my spirit that kind of stack everybody back in order when things get lopsided or heavy or weighted down. Now, the exercise that I'm going to share with you is an exercise that I actually do as a part of an online course I teach called Life After Loss Academy. And this happens somewhere in week 1 or week 2 when we're really talking about how do we create safety and security in a world where anything can happen. And so it's an invitation to DIY your own ritual based on things that feel grounding and feel like home to you. Because one of the most frequent questions I get asked is, how do I compose a ritual for grief and loss when one doesn't exist in the larger world? I've never seen an example of it before. Or just how do I feel grounded at a time when everything feels like it's taking place up here? So again, this image of how do I put my feet down into the ground? So try this on and see if it works for you. Wherever you are, grab a piece of paper and a pen and set a timer for 5 minutes. And think of a place that feels like home to you. This can be a real geographical location that you visited sometime in your life on this earth, or it can be a fictional place, or it can be a place that you imagine maybe to be real, but have never been. And then on this piece of paper, kind of ask yourself these questions. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? And what can I touch? And kind of examine your surroundings and this feeling of home from the perspective of your 5 senses. So for instance, I feel most at home when I'm seeing a green forest, when I'm hearing a train rushing overhead like the Chicago L or even a New York subway. I feel at home when I'm tasting angel food cake, when I'm smelling pine needles, or when there's wet grass underneath my feet. And it's funny because this visual is kind of ridiculous. So home to me looks like sitting in front of a forest having a picnic of angel food cake with a train rushing overhead. So it's like, what exactly am I doing in this place that is home? But it's fascinating because the combination of all these things together, as one of my clients phrased it, she said, it feels as if all the cells in my body have settled down. And that's what we're really trying to go for here in creating this ritual. And if you're struggling to tune into one of your 5 senses, so maybe I'm struggling to hear something, or I'm struggling to have a taste in my mouth as I'm visualizing home, that's okay. Don't pressure yourself to feel a sense of home that's not there. Instead, see if you can bulk up some of your other senses with other stimuli that bring you home or give you that kind of grounding energy. So for instance, it's not just looking at forests that brings me home. I also love how like a glossy piano looks, or yellow and white flowers are my absolute favorite in the world. Or perhaps looking into the eyes of your loved one or somebody that you've lost that you miss can also bring you that grounding and a sense of home too, is really imagining what their face looks like to you. Then when your 5 minutes is up in this exercise, whenever your timer goes off, take a look at your list and circle any sensory trigger that you wrote down that could be incorporated into a ritual that you invent. So when I did this for the first time, I used the smell of pine needles. Smell is a very powerful trigger for me. And I ordered this bulk set, like 12 candles that were all pine scented, and I placed them on a dresser next to a picture of my mother. And almost like 3 or 4 times a week for the first year and a half after her loss, whenever I was feeling overwhelmed, whenever I was feeling sad or anxious, or like I needed to talk to her but I needed a doorway to be able to step into conversation with her or conversation with myself and my grief, I would light this candle, I would look at her photo, and I would kneel on a yoga mat in front of my dresser and kind of either have a conversation with my mom or have a conversation with myself. And when I was done, I would blow out the candle and allow myself to just sit in that space, having processed my grief. And what's neat about this and inventing your own ritual from things that feel like home to you is that you are literally creating almost a cocoon or a nest or a home where you feel safe, because all the things that are inside of it, these triggers, the smells, the sights, the tastes, the sounds, are all things that make you feel like home. So it's like you're making your own recipe for a ritual. And on top of that, in that space, it's like nobody else resonates with this like you do. And so there's a minimal chance of being invaded upon or being disturbed by somebody else's grief, by somebody else's energy while you're in this space. So it increases that feeling of feeling very safe and very protected in this space. I've had online students in my courses tell me that the sound of rushing water makes them feel like home, and so they started incorporating a weekly trip to the creek into their grief and ritual. I've had another student who really loves the experience of tea, like looking at tea bags, putting tea bags in water, touching the tea kettle as it pours boiling water into the pot, the smell of the leaves, and then of course the actual taste of tea as she's drinking it. And so every single morning, and she's a little more religious about it than I am with my rituals, but every single morning for 10 minutes she literally sits at this small table that's dedicated to this ritual with her cup of tea and allows her grief to come forward, and she has a conversation with it. And then another one of my students likes the visual of candlelight or a lantern, and so she got one of those electric candles because she can't have real candles in her apartment, and turns on an electric candle every morning right when she wakes up, and she says hello to her loved one. And then every night before she goes to bed, she turns off this electric candle, places it back into this glass lantern, and says goodnight to her loved one. And it's these beautiful bookends that she's created for her day because of this visual element, the sight element of a candle that she really likes to see. And bringing the crossover of queerness back into this ritual too, there are a few ways you can bring individual, communal, and ancestral grief into this space. For individual, for example, I came out when I was 19 years old, and so maybe adding a picture of my 19-year-old self as a visual cue in my ritual to look at, or even playing a song that I loved when I was 19 can drop me into that space of feeling at home or in conversation with the queer person that I was when I was 19. In terms of communal grief, perhaps a pride flag or a banner or something can trigger your sense memory to say, I am part of a larger community. There is more than me here, and I am not alone. Photos of friends or community members are really helpful for this too. And then for ancestral grief, perhaps something like a recipe from a favorite queer relative, or a recurring financial donation, or a volunteer practice, if you can right now with COVID, to a local queer organization can remind you that, there are others that have come before. I am a part of them and they are a part of me. And so it really weaves that ancestral part of grief into your ritual as well. Yeah, it's a really beautiful way to allow yourself to feel grounded and at home without having to follow some kind of cookie cutter plan that somebody else makes for you that doesn't resonate with you. And that being said too, as you change, as you grow, as you mature, as you learn more things about your grief, as you learn more things about yourself as a queer person as well, your ritual has permission to change. And so you are allowed to shift this practice that you're participating in, that you've created for yourself, into something different as you grow. It's not like you do the 5 senses exercise once, you create a ritual, and then that's your ritual for the whole rest of your life. You could certainly do that, but for the most part, I see people changing their rituals, I don't know, every month or so, every 6 months, every year, kind of as it feels productive, expansive, safe for you and your heart and your grief. You are allowed to change the things that you are doing. And if you enter into a season of new grief in your life, or fresh grief, or maybe new information is coming up from an old grief, you have permission to do this exercise again and see if your sense triggers have changed. What are the things that bring you home? Have they changed since the first time that you did this exercise? And you have a lot of permission to allow this to be something that expands and contracts and morphs and changes as your grief does too. And the last thing I'll say before we close out for the day is, if you are grieving with a partner or a sibling or a friend group, or even with children in the house, this is a really, really accessible way to create a ritual that the whole family can enjoy, that the whole friend group can enjoy, that the partnership can participate in, or even a ritual that you do in remembrance of a loved one, say at a memorial ceremony or at a funeral, because you're inventing something that pays tribute to the loved one, but also how all of you each remember them and sense them and feel at home, calling them into the space. So I wonder if any of your homecoming triggers might be similar to those who have lost the same person that you have. Yeah, through ritual, we remind ourselves that there is actually ground underneath our feet, and an experience that feels very groundless, whether it's being queer or grieving or both. We remind ourselves that yes, there is ground here, even though it feels like there is no ground here, there is ground here. And also that we are not alone. Again, that communal and ancestral grief going back and back and back. Even if you're not in touch with your ancestors, even if you're not a part of the queer community where you are, they are still present Their bodies existed in space and time on this earth. Their presence and their lives influenced the world and how it is now, and you are a part of that legacy and that journey too. Yeah, I hope that this exercise is helpful to you. If you'd like to learn more about the rituals and other exercises that I lead to get you in touch with your grief, you can find out more about Life After Loss Academy, my books, my podcast, Coming Back, which features a couple of different stories from queer grievers as well, all at shelbyforsythia.com. And I know there's going to be resources linking to this. And just thank you so much for joining me today for this ritual and this exercise. I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.